basically all you need to know is like wait till May, buy a couple bags of compost and the seedlings that you want, Google the spacing, mix the compost, plant the seedlings, and just water them till fall, and then till they die, and then buy some mulch. That's like and to mulch to cover your soil for the winter. That's like the basics. And then all this other stuff you can keep on adding. You can add a spring garden, you can add, row covers, drip irrigation. All this other stuff is ideally to increase your production, and also to and make it easier. A lot of this stuff like row covers and pest barrier or pest covers and weed barriers and drip irrigate. A lot of that stuff will just make it takes a little time to figure out, but once you do, it makes it easier and easier to garden as well. So um so definitely, don't feel like you gotta absorb all this information. But all right, so Yolanda said, yeah, UDC will be giving away seedlings April 2nd. Oh, that's great. Do you know where they're giving away their seedlings?
Already back in the main campus.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, if you have any like info on that, if you could share that, that'd be great, like a link or something. And then Lori's asking, are we still sharing seeds, cuttings, and burlap bags when we meet up? For sure. Yeah, we're gonna. I got a lot of free seeds, and we're gonna do some cuttings as well and things like that. So yeah, if you have anything to share this Saturday at Letter, definitely bring that up and bring that out, and we can. Yeah, we can definitely share some things, and we'll give some things for people to take home with. But Cool. All right. So let me get started. So garden calendar planning workshop. It's kind of a mouthful, but like I said, the main thing, a lot of this stuff, we're going to take all the things that we've learned in the last 3 classes, not all of them, but a lot of them, and then stuff that we will learn later, and we're going to kind of plug it out into like a month by month, so like what are all the things that you should be doing each month. First section, we'll talk about like the growing seasons and how actually the different things you can grow in different seasons in DC. And then we're just going to kind of walk through January through December and just to talk about the things that we can be doing. So the main point of this isn't so much that, we'll be reviewing a lot of concepts, but it isn't so much to teach new concepts as of just kind of help people kind of get grasp on when we should be doing all these things in the time frame, because that's one of the hardest parts of gardening is figuring out the timing. Also makes it it won't sadly because I'm okay. So if you want the burlap sacks, it looks like Meg isn't going to be making it this Saturday, so definitely check the chat out and email her if you need some burlap. All right, so growing veggies in DC. So the USDA has divided the world into what we call hardiness zones, and that's basically, it goes from 1 to 10, I believe, and there's different zones for different climates, and we are in zone 7, and there's even letters like A and B usually. We're in zone A. And basically we're in this yellow area, or this like bright yellow is our zone 7 that goes all the way up to here. And that's a great zone for growing food. If you're way up here in like zone 3, like in Minneapolis or someplace, you got a short summer and very long springs and falls, and a long winter, so it's a lot harder to maybe grow. Down in Florida it's great, but it's super hot, so it's hard. It's a long hard summers, but I mean we got a nice season where we're basically our growing seasons are divided into 4 seasons. We have a short spring that we can start planting. This month, March to May, is considered the spring gardens, so that's for your cool weather crops, your kale and broccoli and collards and things. We have a super long summer, so that's where really where you're going to get most of your production is in the summer, the May to like really up to November. So you can grow tomatoes and peppers and eggplants and things. Really, yeah, all the way up until November. It'll start slowing down like September. You know, the sunlight goes down and you get less and less, and then the fruits are smaller and smaller. But I mean, you can definitely grow those tomatoes all the way to November. And then we have a short fall that really starts in August. So you can see there's some overlap in a lot of these seasons, but it starts in August into November. And that where you can do another round of cool weather crops, you know, kale, broccoli, collards, chard, things like that. And then we have a winter season, which really the winter season is if you do really well fall garden, which means if you get them, you know, your plants nice and mature and healthy by like October, November, they'll grow all winter long. Sometimes you have to give them a little bit of, this is called row cover, winter row cover, because especially with the winds, like that's really what messes up a lot of our winter crops I mean, not so much the below freezing, but the wind and the freezing is what's really going to hurt them. So giving them some kind of like winter, you know, cover so it blocks the wind, but allows water and sunlight to go through. And then having that, sometimes you don't need it. Like I'm fine for most. DC has mild winters, so we're usually fine for most winters. But this past winter, I didn't use these covers, and I lost a lot of plants, probably more than half of my overwintering plants. So I'm definitely going to be using these winter covers for now on. But yeah, and we're gonna have a whole class on talking about this is called season extensions, and we're gonna talk about how to build these and how to build the hoops and all different kinds of stuff. All right. So another way to look at these 4 seasons is I created this graph, and I keep on meaning to update this graph because it's a little bit confusing. But just bear with me. So this isn't these are timelines. So this isn't a spatial graph, but these are more timelines for, you know, starting from, you know, spring, you know, summer and into fall. And so this is a great layout if you want to do a 4-season garden. So again, like most people just do summer gardens. You know, if you want to keep it simple and easy, just wait till May. You know, buy some tomato seedlings and peppers and stuff and basil, plant it all, and then just grow it until it dies. And then I'd say more people do that. Maybe do a spring and a summer garden where they'll do a quick they'll grow some greens and things like that, rip it all out. And then in May plant their warm weather stuff. But if you want to do a 4-season garden, this is a great way to do it. And the best way to do it is kind of divide your grow space into 2 spaces. The first space, we'll call that bed 1. So we'll start out with a short spring gardens, you know, from March to May, and then whatever, you know, so you'll try to harvest as much as you can from your kale and collards and things, and then whatever is left in probably mid-May, you'll rip all that out, and then you'll plant your tomatoes and peppers, and then you grow that all the way till September. And then once September happens, you can rip that out and then you can plant a winter cover crop if you like, or like I said, you can keep on just growing your tomatoes and then just, you know, add some mulch, you know, just to protect your soil from the winter winds and erosion and stuff. You definitely don't want to leave your soil bare over winter because you're going to lose a lot of your fertility and it's going to erode and things. And then bed 2, you start at the same time, but this one you want to do a long spring garden. So you take that March all the way to June or July. July is kind of an iffy part because it gets really hot in July. So your kale and collards and things are going to start, you know, they're going to get really hot. They're going to, you know, start, you know, getting a little bitter. And the pests are going to be all over the place. So that's why a lot of people right around June, they'll rip out all their kale and collards. And you can either, you know, you can mulch your garden, you can plant a cover crop, you know, like a summer cover crop like buckwheat, or you could just leave it bare. And then around, you know, August, they'll plant another round of fall gardens, another round of kale, collards, and chard, and they'll grow that all the way till like November, and then add some season extension and you know, some covers, and then just grow that all winter. So that's a great example of, you know, just one of the many ways that you can do a 4-season garden. but like I said, sometimes, you don't have to do a spring and the fall garden. A lot of people will just grow their spring garden, their kales and collards. They'll just grow it all year. They may give it, some shade protection, in the hottest part of the summer, or they just may leave, a lot of people will just leave their collards and kale and just let it get nasty. And then with pests and get bitter. But then, come August, when things start to slowly cool down, they'll all the new growth, the new leaves will be sweet again. So they'll be the same kale and collards, but it'll be like small trees, by this point of time. So, but the problem with doing that though, is you won't get much of a winter garden, because at that point, they're not gonna, a lot of them are gonna die over the winter, as opposed to if you plant new fresh crops in the fall, that they'll definitely, more likely to survive the winter. So that's kind of like that, the options. Like I said, if this is like, way too much, just focus on the summer garden. That's the main one that people like to do. Maybe a little bit of spring crops, and then kind of from there, when you feel comfortable, kind of expand. And then we've seen this a lot, but just a quick reminder, when I say summer crops and cool crops, I mean summer crops, I mean, your tomatoes, eggplants, melons, things like that will die if they get a frost. And then your cool crops are the ones that can actually convert carbohydrates to sugars in their cells, so they can actually make sugar water in their cells that will actually freezes at a lower temperature, gets sweeter. So these things do really well when there's a frost. But cool weather crops you can grow all year. They just get, a little bitter, a little nasty in the summer, but then they get better when the fall comes again. But summer, warm weather stuff can only survive summers. All right, so let's kind of dive into the month by month, even though we're already in March. But let's turn it back to January for a second. So January is a real chill time to be a gardener and a farmer. So this is your planning month. So this is when you're going to be ordering, your seed catalogs, or hopefully once you order anything from a seed company, they'll send you a seed catalog every year. So, but you can also request seed catalogs. If you're going to start growing your seedlings, now's a good time to go to Home Depot or whatever and start, buying your supplies. This is a great time to kind of review your notes from last year and your plans, to see what things worked well, what didn't, what kind of pests you have, how you should rotate your crops this year, things like that, to try to deal with, issues from last year. Ordering seeds, definitely recommend ordering your seeds early. Especially after this pandemic. When the pandemic first hit, people kind of realized that our food system was not so great. So, there was a huge explosion of people trying to grow food and trying to order seeds, and it was really hard to get seeds. So if a lot of people wait till February to order seeds, but when there's times like that, a lot of people got screwed out with seeds. So I definitely recommend trying to get your seed orders in January. And this is also in January is a great time to ask seed companies for their last year's seeds for free. So if you go to this Doug Network website, there's 80 some seed companies. I mean, it only took a couple, it took me like 2 hours to reach out to all of them. And I think I got 25, 30 companies sent me stuff. So it's, it's definitely worth your time if you're wanting a whole bunch of seeds. And you guys will see the seeds that we ordered on Saturday. We can definitely, we made a bit of a seed library, so you guys can definitely grab some seeds. And then if you're growing indoor, a lot of times people, like if they're growing like things like lemongrass and lemon trees and lime trees and stuff, like they can't survive the winter. So what a lot of people do is they'll dig them up and put them in pots and then keep them in their basement or whatever. And you can either keep them under grow lights and keep them growing, or you can keep them in the cool, dark area and they'll actually go dormant, and you don't need to water them or anything like that over the winter, and then they'll slowly come back to life. So it depends on how you're dealing with them. If if you need to keep on watering and taking care of them, or just so different things and whatever you're doing with your perennial plants. All right, so garden designs. We talked a lot about garden designs. This is the last bit we're going to talk about. A lot of this is just like showing you the different plans. When you're making garden designs, you could get all artistic, just circles with words in them. You can get all symmetrical, square foot gardening. This is great. Just writing, like what you're planting and then the number of things that you're going to plant. This is what most of my garden designs look like, just circles with words in them. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do a garden. The main thing is just do one. Even if you don't follow it throughout the year, it will be good for it'll be good next year. So you can look at it and be like, okay, I planted my cucumbers in this area, so let's plant them in this area and try to rotate things. And then also we talked about this before, but just a quick review of just trying to, we want, not only do we want a garden design, but we also want a planting plan, which is just, it could be, it could be whatever you want it to be, but just, kind of list some timings and dates of when you want to plant things, so, looking at, so figuring out what you're going to plant, look at the seed packets for when they're supposed to plant. You can look at these, there's a whole list of garden calendars that will tell you when exactly to plant everything. Johnny Seed Select has this awesome seed calculator where if you just look at the last frost date in DC, which I believe is March 29th, according to Farmers Almanac, you plug that date and it just tells you exactly when you should seed things indoors, how long you should wait till plant them outdoors. So just do, just get some notes and try to calculate, it could just be a piece of paper, it could be a calendar, it could be, but you want to create some kind of plan of when you're going to start seeding things indoors, or when you're going to start planting things outdoors and things like that. So we definitely went into a lot of detail with this in the seedling class, but here's again a list of all the different local garden calendars if you want to try to figure out when to plant what, when to seed what. If you like graphs, if you just like lists, if you like plug databases, you can plug numbers in, they'll tell you the answer. There's whatever your style is, there's a whole bunch of them for this area. And then it's nice to have, like I said, have a calendar. Or, I mean, this works great. This is what I did for a while. I just have each month, and then I write in, February, I'm going to seed these crops. March, I'm going to plant outside these crops. April, I'm going to, double dig. So just kind of like, it's a good idea just to spend a little time and just kind of map everything out. You don't have to follow it to, that's why it's always good to like also have another, have another, write what you actually did. Say if you're going to plant, if you want to plant the second week of March, you want to seed these things, and it doesn't happen to the fourth week of March. Just make those notes, because you're going to go back and look at those notes, and every year you're going to get a little bit better at planning things out based on what you did last year. And then this is like, I showed this already, but this is like our farm planting design where we mapped out, we basically, instead of like, we basically just recorded how many feet of 4 feet beds do we have. And then, we decided, well, we want 80 feet of curly kale here, 80 feet of collards. So it's kind of, and then from there, we kind of plug in the numbers and then after a little math, we figure out how many seedlings we're going to plant every year, and then we kind of map it out on the Google Calendar or Google Excel sheet of when we're going to plant these seedlings. And then we have our what we actually did page, which is life happens. You're not going to follow this stuff to the T, but it's just good to know. That's why I don't like to say, well, I don't like to calculate exact dates. I'd like to say like, and this week we're going to do this, and this month I'm going to do this sometime. But really your preference. And then, like I said, if you want to get really crazy, I got a bunch of templates, for professional crop plans that you can plug in. It's got lots of formulas and stuff, and it figures everything out. So it just depends on, do you just want to draw some circles, maybe make some general calendars, or get really detailed. It all depends on what your preference is. And then, this is a great time, January, you want to get all your supplies if you're going to start your seedlings. We talked about, full spectrum lights. Make sure you have full spectrum or one cool and one warm, because the plants will respond to different spectrums of lights at different growing phases. Having fixtures that you can raise and lower, so because the chlorophyll diffuses over long distances, so you want it to be just a couple inches above your plants, and then as your plants grow up, you want to be able to move it up. So I really like the chain, where you just move it up on the chain link as the plants grow. Trays, what kind of trays, timers, stands, things like that. So definitely, January is the time you want to get all that stuff together. And okay. And then February. So February is when you can actually start getting ready to start planting some things. So February is when we can start, seeding some of your cool weather crops like your cabbage and your broccoli and the Brussels sprouts, things like that, cilantro. So a lot of your cool weather stuff. And it really depends on your timing and how much you want to, you want to pot up versus you just want to grow them in one, 2-inch cell. And then when they're ready, plant them outside. So it's a good idea to kind of think, do a little research and figure out which ones, take a while to grow, which ones are ready really quickly. Like this is why I learned like Swiss chard takes, I figured this out this year, that it takes a lot longer than kale and collards and stuff to get it in decent size. Our Swiss chard, we planted it at the same time as kale and collards, and the Swiss chard's like little baby leaves and the kale and collards are huge. So they look a little sad. So, if you want to get, technical, like a lot of people, they just, they just plant all this stuff in the same day. That's fine too. Or if you want to try to time it out, it's really how detailed you want to get. So Londa asked you, could you send us a few templates? I could definitely send those templates to you all for sure. And then if you want to, you can even start your warm weather seedlings in February, but you gotta be ready, willing to really pot things up. So some people do that, and remember, pot up means like after the seedling gets, you don't want your seedling, the root to get root bound. So once it reaches the limits of your cell, or your pot, you want to put it into a newer pot and a newer pot with more and more soil. You don't want to start with a big pot and then put a seed in, because then the water takes forever to drain. You end up getting a lot of root rot and things like that. You want to keep the, start off in a small pot and then, slowly expand and get bigger and bigger. So if you want to do tomatoes and peppers, you can just know you'll definitely have to pot up, because you're not going to plant these out till May. That's why a lot of people wait till March to do this stuff. But if you want to get a jump start and have giant plants, and your green, if you have the space in the greenhouse, you can, but you need a lot of space at that point. And then definitely think about, like, after the first leaves come out, of your, it may take a couple weeks. The first set of leaves on your seedlings are the cotyledon leaves. They all look kind of the same. The second one's called your true leaves, and that's when you can tell, oh, that's a kale plant, that's a cilantro, that's a dill. So that point, you want to, it's a good idea to think about fertilizing, once a week or once every other week, and things like that. So, all right. And then February is a great month to cut back your cover crop if you are doing cover crop over the winter. This is it looks like grass, but this is a winter wheat, and which is a really nutritious grass. And so what you do is you kind of get some hedge clippers or or one of those whatever cuts grass. I mean, lawnmowers, hedge clippers, things like that, and then cut all that stuff down. Let it kind of dry out for a little bit, and then till it in really well. Kind of mix it up into your soil. And if you could do that like a month or so before you start planting, that soil is just going to be the most amazing soil to plant in. At the same time, February is when we want to start doing structural pruning for fruit trees. We're going to talk more about that in the fruit tree class. And it's also a really great time to do your soil tests. I would recommend waiting till, don't do your soil test when the ground's frozen, but if you have a warmer than a warm for February, or at least above freezing weekend, definitely go out and do your soil tests. And remember, that's where we take a bunch, take a bunch of holes, and you make them the size of your shovel, and then in that hole you want to take a little sliver of soil, remove the rocks, remove the grass, anything that's not soil, and then throw that in a bucket, and do that for each unique area. So if you have one area that's like a nice vegetable garden, or in another area that gets like run off from the road, you want those to be separate tests. And then do like 10 or 15 of them, throw them in the bucket, mix it all up, dry it out a little bit, just take a cup and then send it to one of these labs, and they'll give you the test results within a couple of days and give you recommendations on pH and fertility and things like that. All right, so let's talk about what we can start planting in March. So March, March is a little tricky. So it's definitely Well, indoors is fine. So definitely you can, if you haven't are started already, start your cool weather transplants, your broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, all that stuff. Get all that stuff going by March if possible, just so you can plant it out next month. Then you can, most people start their warm weather stuff as well in March. Or some people wait. It depends on what you're planting as well. So like, the long stuff like tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, they typically start in March. But then most people wait if they are going to do melons and squash and stuff. That's a faster growing plant. They usually wait till April, but definitely do your research and figure out how many weeks you're going to be growing these indoors. And then plan accordingly if you plan on planting, in early May, or mid-May or wherever, just count backwards. So like your eggplants and your peppers are definitely some of the longer ones. So those are really great to start in March. But tomatoes, you can start in March, mid-March or early April, and it'll still be fine to plant them out in May. Yeah, like I said, most people, I mean, usually they wait to about mid-March before they even start things like eggplants and peppers. So unless you plan on potting up, then you can, go ahead and begin in March. But definitely, do your research, figure out how many weeks you're going to be growing them indoors, and then kind of work your way backwards. Starting your sweet potato slips is a great time if you're going to be growing your slips. From your sweet potatoes, we had a great some cool videos on how to do that in the last class. Whether you want to do that, growing them in water or actually cutting them up and putting them in soil and letting them letting them sprout, and then you pluck off the sprouts, you put them in water, rooting them out, and then plant them in the ground in May. So that whole process takes about 8 weeks. So working backwards, if you're going to be planting these out in May, might want to start, mid-May probably. You might want to start in mid-March, start this whole process. And then also you got your herbs and flowers. A lot of these things, take a while to start. So, definitely starting, sometime in March is a good idea, or early April. And then, seeding outdoors. So this, some people, a lot more, I'd say most people probably wait till April 1st to plant most of their transplants and a lot of their seeds. They may seed some, really hardy things, but that's mainly because you're probably going to get another frost or two in March, even if you get some good weather. So it's a good idea, if you want to play it safe, just wait till April 1st. But if you want to get a head start on some things and you're paying attention to the weather, and especially if you have some extra, winter covers, so it just in case there is a really harsh frost that comes out of nowhere at the end of March, you can just cover your crops really quickly. So if you're feeling like that, you want to try, like I said, get a head start, and you're feeling like you're covered, go for it. But a lot of people, I mean, really, it's not that risky to direct seed some of your more hardy things, like lettuces and spinach and peas and potatoes. Potatoes usually is like St. Patrick's Day is when people do that. And then arugula and radishes. So all those things, you're pretty safe. And I mean, you can wait till mid-March. You want to if you want to be really exact, get a soil thermometer and check the temperatures of the soil. You want these between 40 and 50 degrees, so they can germinate. So these are the things you're going to direct seed, like lettuce, you could direct seed that in March, but if you're going to be, transplanting like romaine heads, you might want to wait till April, because that's going to be a little bit more sensitive to frost. So that you're pretty good, on direct seeds, but then you want to be a little careful with your transplants. You want to mainly do hardy. We're going to talk the difference between hardy and half hardy. So hardy are your crops that can really tolerate a lot of frost. They're pretty good. They're the good the ones that do best overwintering. Cabbage, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kale, collards. Definitely those are the best ones. But even so, I mean, they'll handle a light frost really, really well, but like a really deep frost, a hard frost, that even one that's going to last like a day or two, could last, on and off throughout the couple of days, that may, mess them up somewhat. So you definitely want, well, again, check the soil temperature, or usually about mid-March, the soil temperature is 40 to 50 degrees, so you're usually good around mid-March to plant these things, but if you want to be sure, get some soil thermometers, just a couple dollars, at a garden store, and you can double check if you want. But usually mid-March, the soil is good to plant, but then you just want to kind of keep an eye out on the weather. Check that 10-day, forecast. You definitely don't want to plant the same week there's going to be a frost coming, even if it's hardy stuff. That hardy stuff needs to establish itself, for a couple, at least a week or two, before it can tolerate a frost. When you plant them as transplants, when they're little babies, they're not that frost tolerant. So if you see a frost coming that's predicted, in mid, the week of mid-March, wait till after that week and then plant your cool weather stuff. Make sure to harden them off first, even though it's cool out, that sun's still going to, shock them pretty much. So you want to harden them off for a week in early March, get them ready to be planted out. And then, plant them, like I said, usually mid-March, the soil is pretty, good enough for your hardy stuff. But at the same time, I would recommend, because I mean, you never know when a really deep frost, like a hard frost, and we're talking like below like 28 degrees, my light frost is like, yeah, maybe like 30 degrees or something for like an hour or two, and that's not a big deal for these crops. But like something really, in the mid to low 20s, and something that's going to be, may last all day, or a bit, or a while, more than a couple hours, that could hurt them. So again, just, know that could happen. It's not a big deal. If you have a small bed and you lose a couple crops, it's not a big deal. But if you're growing a lot of stuff, it's good to have a backup. Good to have some row covers, or some people bring out blankets, or if you just have a couple crops to cover, you could bring out fish bowls and fish aquariums and stuff. So we'll have a whole class on different types of season extension stuff, and frost covers that you can do. But it's nice to have a couple of those on there. Ideally, one, this is my favorite remake, because rain can go through, sunlight, it's breathable. If you use plastic, you got to open it up every day to allow circulation. So this is nice. But the main thing this is going to do, I mean, it's going to, increase it, it's going to give you a couple degree temperature increase, but not a whole lot. But it's going to protect against the wind. It's a windbreak, so it'll break up that wind, and that's really what messes up your crops. It's like below freezing, and wind is real rough. And it's going to keep, if it does frost, it's going to keep the frost on the covers. The idea is you don't want to you want to get it high enough. You don't want it too high where it's just a bunch of empty space, but you want to get at least a foot above your crops, so that way the frost is on the actual cover, and it's not touching the plants, and that, because that's what's going to damage your leaves, is actually the frost on the plant. So like I said, it's a good idea, just if have some of that stuff on reserve if you do want to try mid-March, or if you're feeling lucky, that's fine. Or like, it's sometimes if you have a small garden, it's not the worst thing in the world to have to lose a couple of seedlings and have to go out and buy some more. Or that's also another reason why you plant extra seedlings for these kind of things as well. um So, but like I said, if you don't want to deal, don't want to, risk it, just, most people wait till April to plant all this stuff, all their cool weather crops, if you want to play it safe. And then also at the same time, it's a great time, especially when it's cold out, and things are still, your perennials are still asleep, or dormant, is a great time to start digging them up and chopping them up and dividing them, and then putting them in pots or replanting them elsewhere. It usually, when perennials are dormant, that means they're hibernating over the winter. They're not really absorbing food or water or chlorophyll. They're just kind of asleep. That's a great time to kind of pull them up and chop them up. So so I want to go over, there's a concept called hardy, half hardy, and tender. Sometimes they call it semi-hardy. So hardy means frost hardy, basically. So this is all about how much they can tolerate a light in the heavy frost. So hardy is your most tolerant. So these are the ones that, like I said, do really well overwintering. For light frost, they probably don't even need any, frost covers. But they do, for if you're going to get some hard frost, especially over winter, if you're going to if we get a really bad storm that stays, freezing for a couple of days, it's going to mess up a lot of them, possibly kill a lot of these, even the hardy ones. So it's a good idea, even on the hard frost, they can use some protection, some cool weather, some frost, protect covers, remay, and things like that. So again, we'll talk all about that season extension stuff and overwintering in another class. Yeah, so these are your hardiest ones: your broccoli, cabbage, collard, kales, things like that. Direct seeding, like the loose leaf lettuce is really hardy when you're direct seeding it. But transplanting lettuce, like lettuce heads and stuff, that is a little bit more tender. You want to be a little bit more careful. But direct seeding lettuce and spinach and peas and things are pretty great. They can tolerate. You can usually plant them, in mid-March. The soils need to be, temperatures need to be 40 or 50 degrees, and then you can plant them. If you want to, you can plant them in March, or play it safe and plant them April 1st. And then you have the half hardy that can, these can survive light frost. But if they get any heavy frost, they definitely need some protection, for sure. If not, well, actually, let me, do that again. So actually, any kind of frost, the half hardy ones can, will need some kind of protection. They can have some damage even with some light frost. This is, cauliflower, chard, Chinese cabbage, lettuce heads, things like that. So so a lot of people will usually wait with these things, and they'll wait till April 1st just because they don't want to, have to do, winter covers and stuff. If you plant them in March, you just want to do some pretty heavy winter covers, plastic covers, things like that. Just keep them extra protected. Or if you have some light remay, double that up, that cloth, that frost cloth, maybe double it up for these guys. Or just, like wait till April. Or if you're trying to overwinter this stuff, if you want overwinter chard or cauliflower, definitely get some heavy, duty, frost covers for these things. And so, like, the difference between hard frost and light frost, I'm sure there's lots of different versions, but typically it's about temperature, and in length of time. It's below that freezing. So a hard frost is like anything like mid 20s and below, for a while, as opposed to a light frost. A light frost is just something that it might dip down a couple degrees just for a couple hours, in one morning in like March or something, and then it goes above 30 degrees. And that's usually not a big deal. Like I said, hardy stuff, you don't even need to cover it. But like anything that's going to be below freezing for more than a couple hours, especially in the 20s, consider that hard frost, and protect, put some coverings out for anything exposed. And then tender is your warm weather stuff. So this is just, it doesn't even matter if there's covers or not, they're going to die, if they're out in the frost. So this is why we wait to plant, mid-May for all this stuff. And then, like we talked about, like, so the hardy crops actually convert, the sugars, in their cells. Their cells are full of water, and when it freezes, they burst. So they convert sugars, they turn starches to sugars, and then mix that into cell water. They make sugar water, and that actually freezes at lower temperature. So it actually works as an antifreeze. So there's a couple graphs, but I'm just going to put a disclaimer. A lot of this stuff, whoever you go to probably has different, opinions on what's hardy and not, what's semi-hardy, what's 40 degree germinates at 40 versus 50, all that stuff. So this is kind of, just take this as a grain of salt, but this is just kind of like showing you a little bit, like at 40 degree germination, these are all the things that will germinate, and typically if it germinate. So if you're direct seeding arugula and peas and things, you want it to be at least 40 degrees or above, or it's just going to sit there and probably rot before it germinates. 50 degrees, you can start doing Chinese cabbage, turnips, chard. A lot of people will direct seed Swiss chard, and even direct seed things like kale and stuff. and then it just takes longer, and they're usually they start harvesting in the summer. I just think it's those things work a lot better as seedlings, but you will, if you start looking at the different planting guides, you will see some of them will suggest, direct seeding these things. And then once you're hitting 60 and 70 degrees, that's when you're getting more into the warm weather things that will germinate the eggplants and cucumbers and stuff. And even though it says broccoli and stuff, so this is germination, but once they germinate broccoli and Brussels sprouts and cabbage, they may need 60 degrees to germinate, which means you got to have a warm greenhouse or a warm basement. But then once you plant them outside, they can tolerate 40 and 50 degree temperatures, and even some frost as well. So yeah, there's some more of these. You can see like each one of them. So I've looked at like dozens of these guides, and they all have different opinions on what germinates and at what temperature. But for the most part, I found these two to be somewhat reliable. So just to kind of check out, you can see the temperature germinations and optimal temperatures and practical temperatures for planting. So so if you're planting these things, like they'll even they'll show, yeah, I mean that's the temperature ideally you want to have, even germinating or planting as well. um And then hardening off. So we talked about this already, but definitely is very important because particularly with the sunlight, because you're getting in the greenhouse, you're getting filtered sunlight. In your basement, you're getting artificial sunlight. It's all very nice, and the cells on the outside of the plants don't really, they don't have to beef up, to tolerate a strong UV ray. But then once you put them outside, they're gonna like fry under the actual UVs of the sun. So that's why you want to put them out for a couple hours at a time in a partially shaded, somewhat protected environment, so they're not going to get too much, and then you bring them back into your house. Ideally, you want to do it 2 hours one day, 4 hours next day, 6 hours. But I mean, that's great if you could do that, but I can never do that. So I mean, we just pull our stuff out for a couple hours in a partially shaded area a day. We'll do like 3 or 4 days like that, as long as we can. But I mean, it's usually like, just like 3 or 4 hours a day. And then that works pretty well. I mean, we did that and we had no transplant shock. Transplant shocks when you plant things and all of a sudden a day later they look like they've been fried. And that's because they have to build up their cells, their membranes of their cells to the strong UV rays of the sun. So that's why you want to slowly build that up, so it doesn't fry it. And at the same time, you need to introduce it to wind and all these other things that it hasn't experienced while it's been germinating. And that's why like cold frames are really great, because you can just leave them in the cold frame all day and all night, and just open the frame during the day so they don't overheat, and then close it at night just so they stay warm. And then March, different maintenance things you can do. Like if this is your first time garden, you could definitely do some double digging. Remember, we had a nice video explaining double digging, but it's basically a way to like kind of till up your soil 2 feet deep. You till up the first foot, and then you use a fork to kind of break up the second foot, and then you kind of move it. I always have trouble explaining it, so just watch the video. But you only want to do this once. You don't want to do this every year. It's a lot of work, and it's just you don't need to do it every year. It's just a way, time to it's a way to get your garden ready. And then if you have cover crop, ideally you want to chop cover crop down and start tilling it into the soil at least a month before you plant. I never make that. I'm usually like 2 weeks, or so, or a week before. And then so I always have chunks of cover crop still breaking down as I'm planting, which isn't great, but it still works, and eventually it'll all break down. But ideally, if you want the best optimal planting experience, do it at least a month before, chop it down, till it in, water it, and let all the biology break that stuff down to really nice soil. And then day of planting, spread compost all over your garden, 2 inches if possible, till it in. If you're doing tilling, if not tilling, use broad forks and garden forks. And then, plant, you can mulch or use weed barriers. If you have bad pests, you can think about, some pest covers. This is all called floating cover, because you just weigh it down with a rock. But then as plants get bigger, you need to make hoops, which we'll show you we actually make hoops. Or you can use PVC, conduit, all different kinds of things. And And then March is really the last time. If you're going to be pruning your fruit trees, you want to go ahead and prune them. If you wait any longer, you're just going to waste all this energy on flowers that you're going to be pruning off, and it's just a waste of energy. And then April planting. So at this point, you're good to plant most of your cool weather hardy or semi-hardy or half hardy plants out. At this point, you're not going to, you typically don't get too harsh of a frost at this point, but even, but if you do, it's always good, if you have some of that remay and that frost covers or whatever to on hand. But you're pretty, most people wait till April 1st as a safe point to plant your cool weather crops. But indoors, you can, if you haven't seeded your tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, start seeding them indoors because they need at least like 6 weeks. If you do it early April, then you should still be good to plant like mid-May, ish. And if you haven't started your sweet potato sprouts, start them. Herbs and flowers and things, go ahead and start them. And then seeding outdoors, you could basically, like I said, seed anything. You could direct seed just about anything you want. A lot of people, like I said, they'll wait till April and they'll direct seed things like chard and kale and cabbage, Chinese cabbage and things like that. Which is, I mean, it's fine. I just prefer to do seedlings because you'll be able to harvest them, so much quicker and get a lot more out of it. And if you put direct seed kale seeds in April, I mean, you're gonna start harvesting when it's hot out too, so it's not gonna be taste the best. The one warm weather thing you can plant outside is fava beans. So fava beans are a shell bean. They're these huge beans. I think they're also called like broad beans, I think. So if you're into fava beans, you can. They are actually, they're considered a warm weather crop, but because they tolerate heat really well, but they also tolerate cold really well as well. So that you can do fava beans in April if you like. And then herbs, you can you're safe to plant your herbs. Like I wouldn't plant any of these herbs in March, but April is a really great time to plant like cool weather herbs and cool weather flowers and things like that. So like I said, like even hardy or half hardy, you're by April you're all good to plant all this stuff. And you can use some like some fertilizers and stuff, to help with the transplant. If you're worried, if you didn't have a chance to really, harden them off very well, like magnesium and calcium and things like that, it helps a lot. So like Epsom salt, pour a little bit into a watering can and then water them in. That's going to help. Compost tea, or it's nice, to like add that stuff, especially like stuff with really beneficial biology to kind of add, either add it. Some people will take whole trays, they'll mix up a bunch of compost tea in a wheelbarrow, and then they'll soak, for a minute or two, the trays of seedlings, and then they'll inoculate all of it, and then they'll plant it in, or you could plant it and then add it afterwards as well. So um, yeah, and then like if you have indoor perennials, get start working on hardening them off, and bringing them out, late April, early May or so, um, or maybe I mean, if you're real sensitive to frost, maybe wait to May, but you can start hardening them off in April if you like late April. April maintenance. So if you plant some peas, that pole peas. I mean, bush peas you don't have to worry about, but like pole peas, it's a good idea to start building a trellis. Peas love this kind of trellis. It's like you just get a bunch of bamboo, you tie it together on the top, and then spread the out. You can get a rope and kind of wrap it all up, and it's a trellis teepee. And they just love. I mean, they'll just grow on this. And you can make any kind of structure too. You can make. I've seen people make like a little like pavilions and stuff where peas just completely cover it, and then kids can hang out in the middle. So you can get pretty creative. Um, then um and also at this time as well, you're going to start seeing, well, really you're going to start seeing this guy in March, but really you're going to start seeing him a lot in April. This is the most dreaded brassica pests in spring. At least in the summer it's our Harlequin beetle, but in the spring, even though they'll last all year sometimes, but they're called cabbage looper fly. So he flies around. It's so hard to squish him. If you could spray him with your hose, it'll slow him down. You can get him. It's like 99 out of 100 times I try to squish them, I can't get them. But they'll fly into your mainly your collards and your cabbage, and they'll lay their eggs, and they'll have these little green inchworms called cabbage loopers that will just demolish your brassicas. Either you can squish them as long as you're on top of squishing them, they're fine. But then you got to really be on top of it. So if you're okay with squishing or using different organic sprays, we'll talk about this really great BT spray that works really well for them. That's great. But if you don't want to deal with them, and you see a lot of these guys flying around, you have tons of collards, and think about Pest Covers. So Pest Covers is that remade that cloth cover, but it's super light. So it's either completely see-through like this one, or it's like it's a very light, a cloth. Idea is it allows sunlight, but it doesn't capture much heat. Because if you keep this on, if you keep a thick cover on all summer, it's going to overheat your plant. So you just want to have a real light cover like this, and then having some kind of hoops what is great as well. And we'll talk about hoops on how to bend hoops in another class. So think about pest covers, but usually if it's your first time gardening, I wouldn't deal with it. But if you know you have a lot of bad issues with cabbage loopers, and it will save you some time for sure. And then watering and mulching and all that stuff. And then if you had, and April's a really great time where all, if you did a overwintering crop, let's say you did really well, great fall crop the year before, and it kept on growing all winter. And then at right about April is when you can usually start harvesting them again. Even you're slowly harvesting them all winter, but around April they really start becoming like a kale plant will start producing again like a normal kale plant. And you can start harvesting them as well. But oftentimes, they only last for another couple of weeks or so. Usually by the end of April, they'll start bolting. This is your kale and your collards and cabbage and stuff. And but when they do, like kale and collards, and they send out this is a kale flower, and usually at this time people rip it up when they see it. But I would urge you instead, take a day and cut these guys out. They are super delicious. They're like a broccoli rabe. You can eat them fresh. You can saute them with some butter and garlic and stuff. It's super delicious. So I usually keep I let my bolting overwintering crops stay in the garden for another week or so, and then I'll try to harvest. Sometimes you can get multiple bolts out of a plant. But you don't want to let once they do that, you don't want to let them sit around too long, because they're going to start rotting, and then they're just going to attract all kinds of pests, to your garden. So eventually you want to, within a week or so, once they bolt, you want to get them, rip them all out, and compost them. And then if you have any additional season extensions and stuff, it's time to, start putting all that stuff away as well. And then these are your bugs that are starting to emerge in the spring, especially in April, May. We'll have a whole class on these bugs, how to identify them, how to treat them, what to do with them, but just real quick, like you'll see the cabbage looper fly, and then a couple weeks later, you'll start seeing these little inchworms. They're crawling on your collards and your cabbage, and just eating all kinds of stuff. So easy way to deal with them is just every time you water, look at the bottom of each leaf on your collards, and if you do that a couple times a week, you'll be able to squish them all. Or if you try to find their eggs, it's a little bit harder, or like using like different BT sprays and stuff, or just pest covers. Slugs, definitely if you start they chew leaves, so you start seeing these holes, you may have some slugs. Beer traps work amazing, or just going out in the middle of the night with a headlamp. They all come out at night and just squishing them. Aphids, anything from like neem oil, which is like this organic oil made from a neem tree in India. Neem oil works great. Even just like a high pressure hose, you can spray them all off. You can squish them, or like attracting ladybugs as well. Ladybugs will just or are ferocious. They'll just like they're the best aphid eaters, and they'll just devour your aphids. So you can buy ladybugs, but if you don't have any like native flowering plants, they'll fly away after they eat them. So you want to create that's why you want to create some habitat to keep them around. If it looks like someone took a shotgun to your leaves, usually these are eggplants, but also you'll find them in kale and stuff. These are flea beetles, so neem oil works really well with this. And this is a leaf miner. They like to squeeze in between the leaves, cell membranes. They don't do that much damage, but it's a good idea to kind of pull that off and throw it in the trash. Don't compost it because it's just gonna that leaf is just going to start rotting and you're going to attract more pests and stuff. All right, so May is when we could start planting our warm weather stuff. You still want to be a little bit careful for some super late frost, and you want to make sure the soil temperatures are all right. That's why some people just wait till mid-May, or they wait till the holidays, Mother's Day, so they'll wait till after Mother's Day, which is like somewhat early to mid-May. But usually, if you wait, so if you want, check, get a soil thermometer if you want to plant, in May 1st. But if you want to play it safe, mid-May is fine. At that point, you can plant all your warm weather stuff. You can direct seed them. You can plant your transplants, flowers, herbs, all that stuff. And you can still keep on planting things like, like carrots and beets and stuff that can tolerate it's going to start getting hotter, can tolerate the heat. Also, if you've been doing succession planting, like with lettuces and peas, now's the time to start thinking about, it's usually like every 2 months you want to have another. Well, it depends. I mean, yeah, it depends on what kind of succession you're doing, but it could be every 2 months, every 2 weeks. Like if you plant a whole bunch of rows of lettuce, it should be every 2 weeks. If you're planting peas and then want to rip them out and plant another round, it'd be like every 2 months. But right about May, if you're doing a cool weather succession, you definitely want to start thinking about how to plan all that out and getting the next succession ready. And then if you haven't, done if you didn't do a spring garden, and it's a new garden, double dig, all that stuff, or if you had done a spring garden, and that you want to think about how you want to transition that spring garden to a summer garden, and yeah, there's multiple different ways. If you have enough room, just if you have enough room you can have a spring garden all year and then have a summer garden on the other side of the garden. But if you only have like a small raised bed, maybe you want to transition that. So the traditional transition is you rip out all the spring crops, sometime in May, add compost, till, and then plant all your warm weather stuff. But the problem with that is that you're going to have a big gap between harvesting. So if you want to reduce that gap, it's sometimes hard to completely eliminate it. But if you want to reduce it, to intercropping planting that we talked about, where this bed was full of lettuce, and then as they're eating the lettuce, a couple of heads each week, they're replanting that lettuce area where that lettuce head was with a pepper plant, and they're slowly transitioning that garden to pepper plants. And then ideally, like once you're done with once you harvested the last lettuce, the first pepper you planted should be close to harvest, or somewhere close to that, in a perfect world. So two options for we talked already about this, but like I said, yeah, if you're doing a cool weather crop, a spring garden or a fall garden, you have two options. The one is, you plant your spring crops, and then in March or early April, you harvest all of them by, end of May, and then you rip it all out and put your summer stuff in, and then you grow that till August, and then rip all that out. And if you want a fall garden, or I mean, you don't have to, but you can keep on growing your summer stuff. But if you want a fall garden, rip all that your summer stuff out and then plant in August, September. So that way you have a spring garden, a summer garden, and a fall garden. Another option is, if like I said, if you have enough space where you can do a summer garden, or maybe you don't want a summer garden, but let's say if you want a summer garden, you plant that in one area, but then you have another area that's just dedicated to spring and fall. And so essentially what you're going to do, you just plant your spring garden and you just never rip it out. You just grow all that stuff. I mean, some of the stuff is going to be, like your lettuce heads and cabbage and broccoli. I mean, that's like once you harvest it, it's done. So you can do a succession afterwards if you want. But then other things like kale and collards and mustard and chard, you can harvest that stuff all year long, and so it just they taste best in the spring and the fall when it's cold, and they're sweeter in the summer. They get more bitter and have lots of pest issues and stuff. So you could fix that by doing pest covers and for the pests, and shade covers to kind of keep it more sweet. But if you don't mind, the work, there's going to be like, especially Harlequin beetles. You'll have loopers and Harlequin beetles. There's a lot of squishing if you don't do pest covers, but it could be a lot of work. Or some people just let it go crazy; they don't even touch it, and then they come back in August and they clean it all up, and then the new leaves in August and September will be sweet again. So and then what's great about that is you have a nice huge plant in August, as opposed to if you're doing a fall garden, it's a little hard timing wise. I mean, you'll plant your seedling in August at the best, and then it's going to be like October before you start harvesting. And but this way you could just continually harvest. So it's more work. But I think I like to do it. I think it's worth it just growing your your cool weather crops all year long. But only downfall is they typically don't last the winter though. So if you really want a winter garden, you need to plant some fresh cool weather crops in the fall. And then May maintenance. So a couple things to be looking at, again, like your new plantings, till, compost, mulch, all that stuff that we've been talking about. You're going to see you notice an increase in your bugs and squishing, and you're going to be watering like your cool weather, gardens. Maybe need water like twice a week, 2 or 3 times. But once it starts heating up, you're going to get closer to like every day. And eventually by June, you're probably watering every day unless you have decent mulch or drip system. And then things to look out to, for harvesting is your cool weather crops. Definitely are going to start harvesting. You might, if you start in March, you might be harvesting a little bit in April, but you're going to be getting most of your stuff in May. You got your garlic's going to be bolting, your hard neck garlic, so you got the garlic scapes that you can be harvesting. Continue harvesting in any overwintering stuff that's bolting. Go ahead and harvest the flowers before you rip them out. And then yeah, and at this point, if you have some as it starts warming up, thinking about like your cool weather crops are going to get more bitter. So if you're wanting to grow them through the summer, think about things like shade cloths and stuff, because that's going to keep, cooler you can keep it, the sweeter the crop is going to be. And then May, this is when you're really going to start harvesting most of your cool weather stuff. So we're gonna have a whole class on harvesting, so we're gonna dive deep into this stuff. But here's just some examples that like lettuce, like loose leaf lettuce. This is that cut and come again, where they do the high density planting, and then they grab a handful of lettuce, they cut it, leaving an inch or two, and then it comes back a couple times. So that's great for salad mixes. Broccoli, you don't want to wait till the little florets are about size of a matchstick, and then cut the top off, and then you'll have a couple additional heads on the sides that won't get as big, but you can cut that. And then broccoli, you can eat the whole entire plant. The leaves are delicious. They're like a sweet collard. The stems are really good to like steam and stuff, or if you peel the outside layer, you can eat it raw. The whole crop is delicious. And then like kale, we talked about kale. We harvest that kale and collards and mustards and all that stuff. You harvest from the bottom and work your way up, never taking more than like the third or half the plant, and then they'll just keep on growing. They'll eventually look like little palm trees, and you can keep on going all year if you like. And then harvesting, different things like like your root crops are going to be like it's going to be about diameter of the top. So radishes, you can harvest them when they're like not even an inch, like 3/4 of an inch. But then like carrots and beets are going to get 2 to 3 inches wide. Beets, you want to get them before they get anything past 3 inches, because they start getting woody. But everything else, you could just keep in the ground as long as you want, and just pull it out whenever you feel like having some carrots. And then peas, it all depends on if what type of pea you're doing, but most people are going to be doing sugar peas. So those, you want them to be plump. And then you take your thumb and do a little upward push on the tip, and then that just snaps right off. And you don't pull them off or cut them off. If you do this, you'll get a lot more peas. It's like every time you want to, with peas and beans, the more you harvest, the more it will reproduce more fruit. So you want to try to harvest it as much as possible, as long as you're doing it right. If you're ripping them off or something, it's not going to want to produce more for you. And then, but if you're doing other types of peas, research that, like the real thin, peas. I always forget the winter peas, I think. Or yeah, you want them thin, you don't want them plump. So just do your research on when to harvest those. But like I said, most people like do the sugar peas. Um, and then yeah, and then here's your now here's your summer pests are going to be emerging right around May and early June. The ones most of these guys aren't that big of a deal. The Harlequin beetles are definitely some of the worst ones. You want to squish them or get a couple of soapy water and knock them in. They're pretty slow and docile. You want to get them when they're little when they're eggs. Their eggs look like they're perfectly symmetrical eggs and they look like striped kegs. But if you can find them, they're on the bottom of the leaves. Like I'll go like every other day, I'll go through the garden and look at the bottom of all the leaves. And usually if you can find them early and squish the eggs, then you're going to have a real easy summer. But if you can't find the eggs and they all mature, then you're going to be doing a lot of big bug squishing. These guys are the absolute worst. Cucumber beetles. They don't do much damage, but they have this like horrible bacterial stuff in their stomach. That when they it's the bacterial welt that if you ever grown cucumbers, you have these beautiful giant cucumber plant and all of a sudden the whole plant dies. That's probably because of these guys. So definitely keep your eye out. They're you can usually squish them when you see them, or you can spray them with water or neem oil or things like that. Just can keep an eye out, and we'll talk more about different ways to deal with them in their pest class. As you're like digging up your soil, you might find these like white maggot-looking things. These are the larva of the Japanese beetle. Doesn't do a whole lot of damage to the garden. Usually they attack like fruit trees and stuff like that. But they're not too bad. White flies, if you ever see what looks like fungus, but you touch it and they're always like white flies. You can spray them with water, neem oil. Tomato hornworm. These big giant worms are pretty easy to identify and squish, but if you're not looking, they can eat up your whole tomato plant pretty quickly. Squash bugs are similar to Harlequin beetles. Vine borers. If you ever see like a whole section of your squash plants all of a sudden die, check the base. If you got these little holes in them, that means you got a maggot that's crawled in and it's eaten. And so you got to take like a razor blade and kind of cut it open until you find them and squish them. So we'll like I said, we'll have a whole class on these guys. We'll dive a little bit more deeper into them, but I just wanted to show you like what bugs are going to be coming out in April and what bugs are going to be coming out in like May and June. And then yeah, cool. Yeah, definitely. Think about shade cloths. If you want to grow cool weather crops and in the summer and you want to keep them sweet, think about giving them some shade and things like that. And then secession planting. So if you're going to do secession planting, definitely May is the time to start thinking about how to do that. You can do it in multiple ways, from planting, this whole bed's going to be lettuce. So, plant one row, 2 weeks later, plant the next, 2 weeks later, plant the next. And then that way you can eat lettuce basically all year. Or finding different, crops, the same crop, different kinds of lettuces, but the ones that mature at different rates. And that way they'll be maturing at different times. Or what we do like with like our romaine lettuce is we'll plant all of our romaine lettuce head seedlings, and then but we will also seed a bunch of seedlings, seed trays in our greenhouse, and every time we pull out a romaine lettuce head, we'll plop in a seedling right afterwards. So that way we're continuously growing and eating romaine lettuce all year long as well. And then intercropping too, finding just different ways to like plant lettuce in between your garlic, so by the time you pull your garlic, the lettuce will mature. And then June. So you can continue, seeding things outdoors. June is, like I said, some people wait to start their summer or their gardens in June. But you definitely want to start in May or June. If you wait any longer, you're just not going to have that much of a season to really to harvest that much. And a lot of these things will produce all summer, so might as well get them in the ground and in May if possible. But all this stuff you can still continue planting. You could continue planting transplants. And then if you want to have a really early start on your cool weather year stuff, if you're willing to pot things up, you can start your fall crops in June, but most people wait till July. But if you got lots of space and you're willing to pot up and put a lot of work into it, you can start some of your cool weather crops for fall. And then June maintenance. June is when garlic is ready. When the bottom half of it turns brown, you could pull it out, and then you want to dry it out in a shaded area like a tool shed or someplace, and let it dry for a couple weeks, and it cures, and that way it stores a lot better. But June is also a great time to start, building your trellises for your tomatoes and sometimes, like if you got big peppers and big eggplants and things like that, you can do some small like bamboo trellises and stuff, but a lot of times they're fine without the trellises. But tomatoes, indeterminate tomatoes will definitely need trellises. Beans and peas will definitely need trellises unless you're doing bush variety. And then now's the time where you want to start, your tomatoes. Hopefully, if you plant your tomatoes in May, and then in June, you want to start pruning them. So that's when the suckers start coming up. So you want to start pulling these suckers out, and cutting off. And as soon as the first flowering branch happens, you want to cut all the branches or pull off all the branches below the flowers. You don't want branches like growing out and touching the ground, because then that's where as a vector for diseases and things to come to the tomatoes. And then like lots of bug squishing in June and July for sure. So then pruning, we're going to talk more about this in the harvesting class, but you're going to want to start pruning your herbs as well. So like if you just plant like take a single basil seed and plant that, and then grow it out, it's just going to be one stalk that's just going to grow up. It's going to have some leaves, not a whole lot, and then it's going to flower on top. But what you do is as the basil grows, if you snap off the top. It kind of grows and has these like it splits off and then it keeps on growing upward. If you snap off right on that split, what happens is all of a sudden that single stem basil is going to be a double stem basil, and then you go back the next week and snap off the tops of the two stems, and then all of a sudden you're going to have four stems, and you keep on doing that all throughout June and July, and all of a sudden you have this like massive basil bush that's just going to produce so much basil for you, as opposed to just one single stem. And that's true with like most like things in mint families and stuff, a lot of your herbs. And then you have these woody herbs as well, like rosemary and dill and stuff. And that you want to actually, you don't want to pinch off. You want to use some pruners, and you want to cut them back a third of the branch, and never harvest more than a third of the plant in the whole. And you keep on doing that way, and it will start, you'll start getting a lot more branches as well. But basil's the main one. You definitely want to start, pinching off the tops of the basils every week in June for sure, until you have a nice basil bush. And then July is if you are doing secession planting, you want to start thinking about when you want to rip those out. For example, a lot of people, what people mostly do for summer secession is like summer squash and zucchini. Those for sure, because summer squash, they produce so much so quickly after for about a month, and then they'll keep on producing for a couple months, but they just it's not much. You'll get you'll be flooded with summer squash, and then you'll maybe get one or two a week after that, first month or so. So that's when I mean, it's fine if you want to, you could just keep on writing it out and you'll get some squash, or if you want to really maximize your production, you can rip that summer squash out, and then drop in the seedling, or direct seed that a summer squash somewhere else in the garden, like a couple weeks before you rip out that plant, so that way by the time you rip it out, you got this other plant that's on its way to producing. So you want to time it kind of just right. So the whole goal is to decrease the gaps between harvesting. So people do that with summer squash and zucchini and melons, cucumbers, for sure. Tomatoes, but I just think tomatoes, it's too much work. And tomatoes, you'll continue getting fruit all year long with tomatoes, but what happens in right around September, October, is they start, they produce less, and the fruits are smaller, and it just gets smaller and less fruit, you know. So really the last couple months you don't get a whole lot of tomato. You'll still get some. So if you it's all right, you just keep on growing them all year. But like again, if you want to maximize your production, people will rip them out, you know, around July, August, and do another round of tomatoes. I haven't figured that out. That's a really hard one to time out for tomatoes, because I mean, you know, summer squash and zucchini is a lot easier because they grow so fast. But tomatoes, I haven't even tried to do a secession for tomatoes. But I know a lot of farmers who do, that are growing for markets. But it's just a lot of timing and a lot of work. But like I said, if you're into it, great. If you just want an easy garden, don't secession plant. Just plant everything once. But July is definitely, if you're growing your fall seedlings, you want to start them in July for sure. So definitely your broccoli, your kale, your cabbage, all these things that you're going to be growing indoors. You know, you start them in your basement. A lot of times though, you can actually start them outside as well. You know, if you don't have basement, because there's plenty of sunlight and it's warm enough, you know, to start outside. You just want to have it in a protected area, where if it's suddenly going to storm, you want to be able to bring them inside really quickly, or you want to, you know, you don't want them to be too beat up on the wind. So if you start them outside, just keep them protected, and pay attention to the weather, and bring them inside when it storms. And then July, certain things that you're going to be looking at, you know, you'll notice, especially in the heat, you'll notice a lot more cracked vegetables. That's because it'll rain, you know, that's from an inconsistent moisture level. So it'll rain a whole bunch, your plant will absorb all this water, it will start growing like crazy, and then you'll have like, you know, a week of drought, and then it will overgrow, and then it will like end up cracking. The best thing to do is just mulch your garden really well with straw or wood chips, you know, no more than 2 inches, but and that keeps your soil more consistently moisture, so it grows more consistently. You know, same with like blossom end rots. We'll talk about this in the disease class, but this is a calcium deficiency if you ever see this. And a lot of times you'll have calcium in your soil, but inconsistent moisture levels make it hard to absorb calcium. So again, like you know, keeping your crops mulched, you know, is a great way to control these kinds of things. And like if you have vine borers, you're going to start seeing them in midsummer as well. So keeping the eye out for that. And we'll talk about different ways to deal with those different that pests as well in the pest class. But if you did everything right, you should start, you know, getting a pretty decent harvest, you know, and by July. Tomatoes, definitely. There's a lot of different ways to tell about tomatoes. You just got to look up your variety. A lot of times it's about, you know, the how soft it is. A lot of times it's the color, or how firm it is. So you know, you just have to research your tomatoes. And same with peppers. You know, sometimes, you know, a lot of peppers will grow different. You know, they'll start out, you know, green and grow in the yellow, orange, red, and they'll have different, you know, hot levels and sweetnesses and stuff. And other ones will go, you know, will jump straight from green to red, and so it's all different types. And you just have to kind of read about what you planted and what you want. And then like potatoes, you're going to start seeing your potatoes around midsummer, getting ready to harvest. So when the tops start dying back, so remember you planted these potatoes in March or April. You know, a lot of people do it around St. Patrick's Day. It's like the holiday that they do it. And then depending on your season, you know, some of them it takes 90 days, 120 days, whatever. You're going to start, you know, at different times, you're going to start seeing the tops, you know, kind of die back. When they die back, that's a great way where you can get a garden shovel and start digging all those potatoes out. But same with like, you know, root vegetables and onions, all these things are going to start maturing about this time. Definitely. And then other things like okra, your okra should start producing. Okra is hard to stay on top of, because literally like you have to harvest okra twice a week at least, because what happens is if it gets more than 4 inches, it starts getting really woody, and then you can't eat it. So I know our okra, we had to stay on. We were trying to only harvest it once a week, and we were losing a lot of okra because it got too big and woody. So definitely want to harvest okra twice a week if possible. And then, you know, summer squash, you want it to be tender where you can break the skin with a fingernail. Winter squash, you want it to be hard where you can't break them, you know, on the skin. Corn, you know, you want the silks to be brown. You can even like kind of pop one of these kernels, and if it's milky, that's a good sign that it's mature, it's ripe. Cucumbers, you want to get them before they turn yellow. Melons, all different kinds of, everyone's got a melons trick. I'll show you a couple videos about how to tell when melons are ripe on the harvesting class, but it can be, smells. It could be, wait, some people wait till they fall off the vine. Some of them are colors of the part, that's touching the ground. So, and then eggplants, you want to get them when they're shiny. If you wait too long, they get dull and woody and disgusting. So if that happens, like if you ever if you ever wait too long, you have yellow cucumbers or dull eggplants, cut those out right away, or the woody okra. You don't want to leave them on the plant because they're just going to continue absorbing nutrients, and it's a waste. So cut those things out and compost them when you see them happen. Then hand pollination, your squash should definitely, early, late June, early July. You should if you're going to hand pollinate your squash or your corn, definitely want midsummer is a great time to do that. And that's where, squash, they have, male and female flowers. So the female has ovaries. So when you wait till you have a bunch of female flowers that are opening, and then you grab a male flower, rip off the petals, and just take the pollen and kind of dip it into all the female flowers, and you should have really great pollination. And same with corn. When the pollen starts getting loose, you put paper bags over them, for a week. You kind of tie it on the bottom, and then pull that off and put it over your silks, and then you should have really great pollination. So, and then August. So August is the time where you need to decide if you're gonna grow your summer garden all year, all the way till November, or if you're gonna do a fall garden, or you can do a combination. You could rip out half your summer garden and plant cool crops, and then continue growing the other half. If there's certain things like cucumbers and squash, if you're just doing one round of those, they're going to be not producing a whole lot around August. So you can rip those out and plant your cool weather crops. But then like eggplants and peppers, they tend to, they can be producing, all throughout the fall. So maybe keep those. So it's really up to you. You can do a combination, whatever. But August is the time that you need to decide if you want to do another round of cool weather crops, a fall garden or not. So you definitely you can start seeding outdoors. You can start planting outdoors in August. Our August is pretty hot, so a lot of people wait till like mid to or towards the end of August, or they may get some shade cloth or stuff like that. But especially with seeds, you plant them in the ground and they're fine. They're not going to overheat as much as like a large transplant. But usually like transplants and seeds, even they're cool weather, they're pretty tolerant of the heat. Up until they start getting mature, and then they can really, bother them. But yeah, this is a great time if you want to have a really nice fall garden. Think about sometime in August, planting, your direct seeding, your spinach and mustard and things like that, or planting transplants. Either hopefully you've been growing them in your basement since July, or you're going out to a garden store and buying some transplants. And then again, you can either rip out your whole summer garden and then plant your fall garden, or you can slowly transition it with intercropping, or you can just rip out parts of it that are done and then and plant cool weather crops there while keeping your tomatoes and your peppers still producing. So lots of different options. So keep on pruning your tomatoes. It's not a bad idea to give, if you have the shade cloth, give your newly planted fall crop some shade. You can definitely, they don't need the shade cloth. It's just it helps them, and it gets sweeter as well if you can cool them down. And then September, so yeah, September is kind of like your last shot as a cool garden, cool weather or fall garden. So if you haven't planted by September and you want a fall garden, you need to plant as quick as possible, because really it's more about the sunlight. The sunlight is decreasing each year, each week, and then so you need to get your plants mature by like October, or they're just never going to be mature. It's just not enough sunlight to get them to that point. So that's why you need to, if you haven't planted in August, plant in early September. all your transplants. If you're buying transplants in September, try to find big ones if you can. Also, if you want to do a cover crop, so there's lots of different winter cover crops, but some of them, like clover, has to be planted in September. And then, but if you want to wait till October, November, because clover, it needs a warm soil to germinate. But once that soil gets too cold, you can't do clover. But you can still do like the grasses. You can plant those grasses all the way up to like November. So again, if you're doing cover crop, you want to get like a hard rake. You want to just kind of rake things up and then kind of take a handful of seeds and just kind of broadcast it, lightly sprinkle it over, and then take that hard rake and then slowly kind of like mix in the soil with the seeds, kind of rake it over a couple times, water it really well. If you have straw, mulch it. And then you want to continue watering it like a normal plant until like October, November. At a certain point, it will be able to get water on its own. But you definitely want to, treat it like a normal crop and continue watering it regularly. And so this is this is what I do for my cover crop. I always have, I have all these trellis beds of like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants that, and I do a good job pruning them on the bottom. So the soil is pretty open and on these beds. So then I'll take a hard rake and I'll rake in the soil, broadcast the seeds. I'll seed them in September. It takes like a month or two for them to really go. And then if you do it right, by November, when I'm ripping these tomatoes out, I'll have a real thick cover crop underneath. And so I do that with my tomatoes and everything I trellis, and then I just move those beds around the farm each year. So I'm cover cropping a certain section each year. So you don't have to cover crop your whole garden. If you could just make sure to cover crop a section of it and then move that section every year as you rotate your crops, you're going to be, adding nutrition and building up your soils, over time. And then at September as well, you're going to start harvesting the rest of your sweet potatoes and onions, all these big things that you started way in spring and have been growing in the ground. Now's the time to kind of pull them out. The problem is, it's like when you pull out sweet potatoes, they're not sweet. They're very starchy. So you have to do things called curing to kind of where it was different for each crop. Like sweet potatoes, you need to put them in a humid environment for a while. It's like you'd put a tarp over it in the sun. A lot of people, I'll see all my farmer friends always have sweet potatoes in the back window of their car because that's like a nice little humid area, and that's a great way to but you do that for like a couple weeks and the carbs turn to sugars. We'll talk more about curing sweet potatoes in our harvesting class. And then potatoes, if you want them to store, you got to toughen up the skin a little bit. So you keep them in the ground for an additional week or two after the tops die off and they cure in the ground. Onions, if you want them stored as well, you got to like kind of dry them out and for a couple weeks and until the tops are kind of shrivel up, and then they'll store for all winter, if you need that. And then October, so now you're getting to the point where there's not a whole lot you can plant in October, but garlic is when you plant. October is when you plant garlic. So that we talked about planting garlic, but don't use grocery garlic. Get your farmers market garlic, or save your best garlic from last year and replant that. And you just break them apart, leave the paper on each clove, and plant them 2 to 4 inches apart with the sticking upward in a trench, and then bury them. And then again, they'll grow over the winter. You'll get scapes in May, and you harvest them in June. And then if you haven't done a winter cover crop yet, now's the time. At this point, depending on the soil temperature, you're more likely only going to be able to do a winter rye or winter grass. But try to incorporate that in by October. And then if you're doing bulbs, bulbs like flowering bulbs, like that, daffodils and stuff like that, crocuses, you plant spring bulbs in the fall, and you plant fall flowering bulbs in the spring. So if you want spring flowers, plant them in October. And then October maintenance, you definitely want to start harvesting the last of your warm weather crops, because as soon as that frost comes, they're all dead, and they're going to be they're going to be ripening slower and slower. So some people, there's ways to actually rush crops. like tomatoes, if you pull them out, like leave them upside down, it kind of freaks them out and it sends all the sugars to the fruit to ripen them really quickly. Um, you can, there's different ways to rush ripeness. Definitely making sure your garlic, has you mulch in your garlic so it doesn't dry out over the winter. And then fall cleanup. So as you're wrapping up your garden, especially if it's a summer garden and you're not going to continue growing, remove all your any plants with diseases out of your garden. Throw those things away. Don't compost them. And then like there's different theories about some people will pull all their plants out and throw it in the compost bin, compost it, and then they'll put the compost back in the spring. Other people will chop up their plants, like their tomato stalks. They'll chop them up and leave them on the soil, and it creates habitats for different beneficial insects and things throughout the winter. I like to leave my roots in the ground. I'll chop my plants at the base and leave the roots over the winter and let the roots kind of rot. It adds organic matter, and then I'll compost the tops of the plants. So it's like I said, there's lots of different ideas. Whatever you're feeling like. The main thing is you don't want to leave your soil bare. So at the very least, buy a bag of mulch and cover your soil over the winter, or you're gonna lose a lot of your soil over the winter. And then hoses and everything. Make sure you put all that stuff in the shed. Don't leave it out for it to get damaged by the winter winds. And if you have drip irrigation and things, blow those out. Cisterns, you either empty them or leave them like halfway so they don't, if they freeze, they don't bust up. And then now October is the time, if you have like lemongrass and things like that, start bringing those inside before the frost comes and kills them. So Lori asked, grocery store garlic won't grow. No, it will. You just don't know what you're getting. A lot of times they spray grocery store stuff. They may spray it with things that keep it from ripening. So it may not ever get to that point where it's ready to grow. You just don't know where it's coming from, what environment, so it can work, for sure. If that's all you got, go for it. But if you have a choice, I would either get your garlic from a farmer's market or order it from a seed company. But if that's all you got, it will definitely work. Oh, it will probably work, but you have better chances of it working if you get it in better sources. And then November is like, if you are doing a winter garden, let's say you planted your stuff in August, your cool weather stuff, and it's pretty mature by October, and and they look pretty good. So there's a good chance you can keep them going all winter long. But I definitely recommend doing different kinds of winter cover crop, low tunnels. We'll have a whole class on how to build these. But November is the time that you want to start installing these to kind of, installing some kind of winter protection. So the first frosts are definitely coming in November, and along with winds. And I mean, it's different every year, but like, if you get a really bad frost really early, like even your hardy cool weather stuff may not survive. So you want to give it some kind of protection, even if it's just wind breaks, from the winter winds. If you're doing lasagna gardening or sheet mulching, now's a great time to start it. Let's say you want to start a new garden in your backyard and it's all grass, do some sheet mulching and lasagna gardening in November, and then it will be some really nice soil for you next spring. So someone's asked, I want a rain barrel, but does it have to be winterized? No. The main thing is you don't want to have a full barrel of water when it freezes, because water expands when it freezes. So if it's completely full of water, it's going to just bust your rain barrel. So a lot of people will completely just drain the whole thing if they don't need any water over the winter. That's what most people do. And then they'll detach their downspout from their gutters. So it just flows into, somewhere else, not your rain barrel. But then some people need the water. Some of our gardens, the water turns off, so that all they have is a rain barrel. So if that's the case, we recommend not like just filling it up halfway with water, so that way if it freezes, it's got room to expand, so it's not actually gonna just explode. So if you need the water of the winter, just keep it half full at all times. And then December, if you're not growing over the winter, it's a pretty easy month. But if you are growing, it's still pretty easy. Winter gardens are super easy. Like you need to you water them like once a month. It doesn't dry out. So, but you still need to water them though. You still need to check, like these are what happens when it snows and you got your hoops, your winter cover crops. You still need to get in there once a week and check the soil, do a finger check. And as soon as it gets, too dry, then you want to water it. But like I said, it's usually like once a month, and depending on the moisture. And sometimes, you can get it's even longer than that. So you definitely want to, if air out if you're doing like uh, what I forget the name. If you're doing cold frames or plastic tunnels, you want to air them out every day to get, or you'll get fungal issues. That's what's nice about this remay is you don't have to open it up every day because it's already got circulation. But if you're using plastic, which is actually more protective, it'll actually protect your crops more, but it will get too humid and you'll get fungal issues. So you got to open it up once a day to kind of air it out a little bit. Same with these cold frames, but that's why I like this stuff. It's not as protective, but it's very low maintenance, the remay. And we'll show you. We're using the summer pest covers at Letters, so we'll show you what it looks like on Saturday. Yeah, and just kind of checking on your stuff. You don't want to harvest too much on the winter stuff because of the sunlight, the lack of sunlight. It grows very slowly, but so never harvest more than like really a half of your plants. So things you'll have like kale and collards and things like that growing. You'll also have like things like your cabbages and your broccoli and your root crops will keep on growing. And a lot of times that stuff you won't ever really it won't mature over winter, but it will mature in early spring. So a lot of times, a lot of stuff like that, like the single cut, harvesting stuff, you're not necessarily going to be harvesting it over the winter, but you're going to be coming back to it early spring and harvesting it. But the kale and collards and the lettuces and things like that, you can be harvesting all winter long. It just is at a much slower pace because things are growing so slow over winter. And then they pick up again in the spring. They usually like March and April they'll start growing again. You can reharvest them, but then at that point they're just so exhausted that usually by mid-April they just start dying. But you will get another short spring crop with the stuff that you overwinter. And if you're really into like for four season stuff, Elliot Coleman is kind of like the main guy in this country. He's written all kinds of books, but he's got one about 4-season harvesting that really, if you want to lock down the timing and everything like that. But like I said, like start out with just your summer, and then maybe add a spring when you're feeling, ready, and then you kind of slowly add the seasons and work your way up to the 4 seasons because it's a lot of planning and timing and it could be a little tricky. But yeah, that's tonight's class. Yeah, thanks for joining. We can I'll definitely hang out for a little while if anyone has any questions, but we'll end a little early. And then if you're just joining and you haven't heard yet, we are meeting this Saturday at Letterer, 10 to 12. We're gonna do rain or shine. We can't. We're already so late on this, and I want to give away some seeds and things. So if we postpone anymore, it's going to be too late to do some of the things that we want to do. So rain or shine, we'll make it work. There's a giant pavilion, so you won't get wet, and unless you want to. But yeah. Other than that, thank you all so much for joining. Like I said, I'll stick around for a little bit if you have any questions. If not, I'll see you this Saturday.
Are you still recording?
Yeah, you want me to stop?
Oh, I don't care, but
yeah, I stopped recording.